Imagine a world where the tragic events of September 11, 2001 never occurred. What would our society look like today? How would global politics, culture, and technology have evolved? Let's delve further into this fascinating hypothetical and embark on this thought experiment together. On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 terrorists associated with the extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked four commercial airplanes. Two planes were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. One struck the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, and the fourth, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers attempted to overcome the hijackers. The attacks resulted in nearly 3,000 deaths and caused unprecedented destruction and disruption. So, in this video, we're going to explore an alternate history where 9/11 never actually happened. We'll discuss how such a scenario could have reshaped various facets of our world, including the geopolitical landscape, cultural shifts, technological advancements, economic impacts, and the social dynamics. Before September 11 attacks, U.S. foreign policy was characterized by a focus on multilateralism, economic diplomacy, and a relatively restrained military presence abroad. The end of the Cold War had led to a unipolar world order with the U.S. as the predominant global power. Engagements such as the Gulf War in 1990 to 1991 were exceptions rather than the norm, and the U.S. maintained a policy of dual containment in the Middle East, aiming to limit the influence of both Iran and Iraq without direct military intervention. The 9/11 attacks marked a significant turning point in U.S. foreign policy. The immediate response was the initiation of global war on terror, which led to military interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Bush administration justified these actions through the Bush Doctrine, emphasizing preemptive strikes and unilateral action against perceived threats. Without the 9/11 attacks, the US likely would not have invaded Iraq in 2003. The invasion was primarily justified by the alleged presence of weapons of mass destruction and Iraq's purported ties to terrorist organizations. However, these claims were later discredited, leading to widespread criticism of the war. In Afghanistan, the U.S. intervention aimed to dismantle Al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power. Without the impetus provided by 9/11, it's plausible that the U.S. would have continued its policy of diplomatic engagement and limited military presence in the region, focusing on containment rather than active intervention. With the absence of the events of 9/11, the U.S. would likely have shifted its strategic focus towards other emerging global challenges. Relations with China, for instance, might have evolved differently with increased emphasis on economic competition and diplomatic engagement. Similarly, the US could have directed more attention towards North Korea's nuclear ambitions, potentially leading to earlier, more robust diplomatic efforts to address the issue. The absence of the war on terror might have allowed the US to concentrate on strengthening alliances in other regions, such as Asia and Latin America, and to invest more in global institutions like the United Nations rather than focusing on military interventions in the Middle East. In a world where 9/11 never occurred, U.S. foreign policy would likely have maintained a focus on multilateral diplomacy, economic engagement, and strategic partnerships. The absence of war on terror would have allowed for a more balanced allocation of resources and attention to emerging global challenges, potentially leading to a different international landscape. In the absence of 9/11 attacks and the subsequent U.S. military engagements in the Middle East, the global balance of power would likely have evolved differently. Without the diversion of resources and attention, the United States might have better positioned to counter the rise of other global powers, particularly China and North Korea. China's economic and geopolitical rise has been one of the most significant developments in the 21st century. While China's ascent began before 9/11, the U.S. focus on the war on terror provided Beijing with a strategic window of opportunity to strengthen its position on the global stage. This period saw China intensifying its economic reforms, expanding its manufacturing capabilities, and increasing its influence in international institutions. China's Made in China 2025 initiative, launched in 2015, aimed to transform the country into a global leader in high-tech industries such as robotics, aerospace, and clean energy. Despite international criticism, the program has significantly reshaped China's manufacturing landscape, reducing its dependency on foreign imports and increasing its global manufacturing share to 29%. Additionally, China's Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013, has expanded its influence across Asia, Africa, and Europe through infrastructure, investments, and economic partnerships. This ambitious project has further solidified China's role as a central player in global geopolitics. North Korea's pursuit on nuclear weapons has been a long-standing concern for regional and global security. While the country's nuclear program predates 9/11, the US focus on counter-terrorism efforts in the Middle East may have allowed Pyongyang to advance its nuclear capabilities with less international scrutiny. North Korea's first nuclear test in 2006 was followed by several more, demonstrating significant progress in its nuclear weapons program. The country's ability to develop and test nuclear weapons has been attributed to a combination of factors, including its isolationist policies, reliance on domestic resources, and strategic partnerships with countries like China and Russia. The US focus on the war on terror may have diverted attention and resources away from addressing the North Korean threat, allowing the regime to continue its nuclear development unabated. The US preoccupation with the Middle East also affected its relationships with other global powers. China and Russia, concerned about the increased US military presence in Central Asia, which strengthened their bilateral political and economic cooperation. Through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they aimed to counterbalance US influence in the region. This shift in alliances has implications for global power dynamics, as China and Russia collaborate more closely on issues ranging from trade to military cooperation. The US diminished focus on these emerging powers may have allowed them to expand their influence without significant opposition. The September 11 attacks exposed significant vulnerabilities in the US intelligence community, particularly in terms of information sharing and interagency coordination. Prior to 9/11, agencies like the FBI and CIA operated in silos, often withholding critical information from each other. This lack of collaboration hindered the ability to detect and prevent terrorist activities. Before the attacks, the FBI's focus was primarily on criminal investigations, with limited emphasis on counterterrorism. The agency lacked an effective analytical program and failed to utilize the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act statute fully, which impeded its ability to monitor and disrupt terrorist plots. Similarly, the CIA's efforts were often hindered by bureaucratic barriers and a lack of coordination with other agencies. The agency's focus on traditional espionage sometimes led to neglect of emerging threats like Al-Qaeda. In response to the intelligence failures highlighted by 9/11 attacks, significant reforms were implemented to enhance coordination and information sharing. The Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 established the position of Director of National Intelligence to oversee and coordinate the activities of the U.S. intelligence community. Additionally, the creation of National Counterterrorism Center centralized the analysis of terrorist threats, while the Department of Homeland Security was established to consolidate various agencies responsible for domestic security. The reforms also emphasized the importance of information sharing among agencies. The establishment of fusion centers facilitated the integration of intelligence across federal, state, and local levels, promoting a more collaborative approach to counterterrorism. The post-9/11 era saw a shift in the nature of threats faced by the U.S. intelligence community. While traditional state actors remained a concern, non-state actors like Al-Qaeda and later ISIS posed new challenges. These groups' decentralized structures and their use of asymmetric tactics required intelligence agencies to adapt to their strategies and operations. Despite significant improvements, challenges persisted. The vast amount of data collected through surveillance programs has raised concerns about privacy and civil liberties. Balancing national security interests with individual rights remains a continuous issue. Without the shock of 9/11, the United States would have likely followed a different trajectory in terms of its relationship with security, government trust, and surveillance. The absence of this event would have meant that the US public might not have experienced the same drastic shifts in societal attitudes, especially concerning privacy, government control, and fear of terrorism. Without the urgency and fear generated by 9/11 attacks, it's likely that the US government would not have felt the same pressure to pass laws like the USA Patriot Act, which dramatically expanded surveillance powers. The Patriot Act, signed into law October 2001, gave the government sweeping powers to monitor phone calls, emails, and financial transactions of US citizens, all in the name of counterterrorism. Without 9/11, it's unlikely that such widespread surveillance would have been implemented, and the American public may have retained a higher level of trust in their government. In this alternate world, the government's relationship with its citizens would have remained more transparent, and Americans may have less wary of the government's encroachment into their private lives. The trust deficit that developed post 9/11, where the government was viewed as invasive and overreaching, might not have occurred. This might have preserved a sense of civil liberty and privacy that was disrupted by the subsequent security measures put in place after the attacks. Moreover, a lack of 9/11 might have meant fewer political divisions surrounding surveillance, privacy, and civil liberties. The debates over whether the measures like the Patriot Act were necessary or an overreach might have never been as intense. Without a pressing need to react to terrorism, government programs that infringe upon privacy, like mass surveillance programs, might not have gained momentum. The rise in Islamophobia and the subsequent backlash against Muslim American communities is one of the most painful consequences of 9/11. The immediate post-9/11 world saw a sharp increase in hate crimes, profiling, and discrimination against Muslim Americans. Many Muslim Americans were subject to FBI surveillance, government monitoring, and social alienation, all of which were exasperated by the political climate created by the attacks. Without 9/11, the systematic targeting and profiling of Muslim Americans might not have occurred in the same way. Muslim communities might have experienced greater social acceptance with fewer hate crimes or discriminatory practices directed at them. There may have been a more inclusive narrative around Islam, avoiding the widespread cultural backlash that led to alienation and fear. In this alternate reality, the US could have continued its journey towards greater multiculturalism and inclusivity with fewer restrictions on religious expressions and ethnic identity. The absence of 9/11 could have meant that Muslims in America faced fewer obstacles when it came to integration and representation in the workforce, media, and politics. Without the 9/11 attacks and the war on terror that followed, the entertainment and media landscape in the US would have likely evolved differently. The events of 9/11 catalyzed an explosion of war-related media, documentary films, and news coverage, all of which influenced public perception of global politics and military interventions. In an alternate reality where 9/11 never occurred, the focus of Hollywood and the media might have directed elsewhere, changing the type of content that gained popularity and its cultural impact. After 9/11, the film industry saw a surge in war-related films and television shows, many of which reflected or responded to the events and their aftermath. Movies like Black Hawk Down, The Hurt Locker, Zero Dark 30, and American Sniper became iconic, focusing on the realities of modern warfare, particularly in the Middle East. These films often grappled with themes of heroism, sacrifice, and the moral ambiguities of war, deeply influenced by the post-9/11 geopolitical environment. Without 9/11, Hollywood might not have seen the same level of focus on war films. Instead, the movie industry may have produced more escapist content or films addressing other social issues without the heavy military themes tied to the war on terror. There would likely have been fewer stories glorifying military actions in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Hollywood's portrayal of the US military might have been less prominent. Films in this alternate timeline might have taken on different narratives, such as more focus on domestic issues, exploration of global political dynamics, or perhaps the emergence of new genres that explore technology, environmental concerns, or social justice. The US media landscape would have likely have been less defined by the lens of post 9/11 conflict. One of the most notable cultural shifts after 9/11 was the portrayal of Muslims in the media. In the years following the attacks, Muslim characters were often depicted as villains, terrorists, or individuals at odds with American values. These portrayals contributed to a dangerous stereotype that continues to affect Muslims in the US and abroad. Without 9/11, it's likely that Muslim characters would have been represented in a more balanced and nuanced manner. Rather than being seen primarily as threats, Muslim characters might have been portrayed in more diverse roles: heroes, romantic leads, business people, or ordinary citizens. Media portrayals of Muslims could have reflected the richness of their cultures and histories instead of the widespread stereotyping that emerged in the wake of the War on Terror. A lack of 9/11 might have allowed for greater inclusivity in casting and storylines, potentially giving rise to a broader spectrum of narratives that reflect the complexity of Muslim experiences in America. The absence of the fear and suspicion created by post 9/11 events could have led to more positive and empowering media portrayals, perhaps fostering a better public understanding of Islam and Muslim communities. This shift in Hollywood and media representation, had 9/11 never happened, would have likely played a significant role in shaping American society's perception of different cultures, nationalities, and military conflicts. In a world without 9/11, we have witnessed a more progressive, inclusive entertainment landscape that represented a wider variety of experiences without the influence of a culture of fear. The attacks on September 11 dramatically reshaped American society, fostering an atmosphere of fear that significantly impacted Muslim communities. Islamophobia, the prejudice, discrimination, and hatred directed against Islam and Muslims, experienced a troubling surge in the aftermath of 9/11. But what if this tragic day never occurred? How might public sentiment towards Islam and terrorism have developed differently? Would there have been a rise in anti-Islamic rhetoric without 9/11? In the years following 9/11, Islamophobia was fueled by fear-driven narratives, with Muslims frequently cast as security threats in political disclosure, media coverage, and social interactions. Politicians, pundits, and various media outlets increasingly associated Islam with terrorism, resulting in widespread misunderstanding and mistrust toward Muslim communities in America and beyond. Without 9/11 as a catalyst, it's reasonable to assume that the anti-Islamic rhetoric that pervaded the early 2000s would have been significantly less intense or even non-existent. Muslim Americans may not have faced the same widespread suspicion or surveillance, and public perception of Islam would have likely remained more neutral or perhaps evolved in a more positive direction. Without the fear generated by terrorist attacks on American soil, political figures would have been less incentivized to capitalize on anti-Islamic sentiment for electoral or policy gains. Discussions around immigration and national security might have focused less on religion or ethnicity, potentially creating a more inclusive and less divided social climate. What kind of culture of fear might have existed? The culture of fear that emerged after 9/11 profoundly influenced American life, leading to increased surveillance, tighter security measures, and persistent anxieties about future terrorist attacks. The national discourse became heavily focused on external threats, dramatically affecting how Americans interacted with each other and the world. Had 9/11 never happened, it's likely that the culture of fear surrounding terrorism would have been significantly less pervasive. Americans would not have experienced the same heightened anxiety around public spaces, travel, or interactions with diverse communities. The nation's collective mindset could have been more optimistic and less driven by paranoia, shaping a different approach to both domestic policy and international relations. However, it's important to acknowledge that other global incidents or tensions, perhaps stemming from economic crisis, cyber threats, or international conflicts, could have emerged as dominant sources of fear and concern in the absence of terrorism-driven anxiety. The US might have developed a different set of security concerns, perhaps oriented towards economic stability, technological security, or climate change, shifting public anxieties away from religion or cultural identities. In essence, without 9/11, America might have avoided one of the darkest chapters in terms of religious prejudice and fear-driven policymaking. This alternate path could have allowed for more cohesive societal interactions, broader acceptance of diverse communities, and a dramatically different discourse surrounding security, diversity, and tolerance. The September 11 attacks profoundly transformed airport security in the United States and globally. In this alternate timeline where 9/11 never occurred, the evolution of airport security would have taken a markedly different path. Before 9/11, airport security was relatively relaxed. Passengers could arrive shortly before their flights, proceed directly to the gate without boarding pass or ID, and bring items like a 4-inch blade knives aboard planes. There were no requirements to remove shoes, belts, or jackets during screening, and liquids were not restricted. In response to the attacks, the U.S. federalized airport security by creating Transportation Security Administration (TSA) through the Aviation and Transportation Security Act of 2001. This move centralized security operations and standardized procedures across the country. Without 9/11, it's plausible that the TSA would not have been established and airport security would have remained under private contractors. The extensive measures introduced post 9/11, such as full-body scanners, liquid restrictions, and shoe removals, might not have been implemented. In this alternate reality, air travel would likely be more streamlined and less invasive. Passengers might not be suspected of rigorous screenings, leading to shorter wait times and a more relaxed travel experience. However, the absence of heightened security could also mean increased vulnerability to threats, potentially leading to a different security challenges over time. In summary, without the catalyst of 9/11, airport and travel security might have evolved at a slower pace, focusing on efficiency and passenger convenience over stringent security measures. The alternate path presents a complex trade-off between ease of travel and potential vulnerabilities. In this alternate reality, the evolution of surveillance and privacy would likely have been more measured, with a greater emphasis on safeguarding individual rights. The absence of 9/11 might have allowed for a more balanced approach to national security, one that doesn't compromise the foundational principles of freedom and privacy. In the aftermath of 9/11, the United States witnessed a significant shift in the technological priorities, with a heightened focus on security and surveillance. But in a world where 9/11 never happened, how might technology and innovation have evolved differently? Post 9/11, substantial investments were made in technologies aimed at enhancing national security. This included advancements in surveillance systems, biometric identification, and data analysis tools designed to detect and prevent terrorist activities. While these developments bolstered security infrastructure, they also diverted resources and attention from other areas of technological innovation. In an alternate timeline without the impetus of 9/11, it's plausible that these resources would have been allocated to other sectors, such as healthcare technology, renewable energy, or space exploration. The tech industry might have prioritized consumer-focused innovations, leading to accelerated developments in areas like mobile technology, artificial intelligence, and sustainable solutions. The security measures implemented after 9/11, including the U.S. Patriot Act, expanded government surveillance capabilities, raising concerns about privacy and civil liberties. In a scenario where 9/11 never occurred, the balance between security and individual rights might have tilted towards the latter more, fostering a technological environment that emphasizes user privacy and data protection. Without the urgency to develop security-focused technologies, innovation would likely have been more driven by market demand and consumer needs. This could have led to a more diverse technological landscape, with startups and established companies alike focusing on enhancing quality of life, improving communication, and addressing global challenges unrelated to terrorism. In this alternate reality, the trajectory of technology and innovation would have been shaped more by consumer interests and global challenges than security concerns. This could have resulted in a technological landscape that prioritizes privacy, user-centric design, and solutions to pressing issues like climate change and healthcare. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, U.S. financial markets experienced unprecedented disruptions. The New York Stock Exchange and Nasdaq closed for 4 trading days, the longest shutdown since the Great Depression. Upon reopening, the Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted 684 points, marking a 7.1% drop and culminating in a 1.4 trillion loss in market value by week's end. In a world without 9/11, these dramatic market upheavals would likely have been avoided. Investor confidence might have remained steadier, potentially leading to more robust market performance in the early 2000s. The financial sector, particularly in New York City, could have continued its trajectory without the shock-induced volatility that followed the attacks. The aviation industry suffered significant setbacks post 9/11, with immediate flight groundings and a sharp decline in passenger numbers. Airlines faced massive financial losses, leading to layoffs and, in some cases, bankruptcies. Similarly, the tourism sector, especially in New York City, experienced a downturn due to heightened security concerns and reduced travel. Absent the attacks, the aviation and tourism industries might have maintained their growth trajectories. Airlines could have continued expanding routes and services, while cities like New York might have seen sustained or increased tourist activity, bolstering local economies and employment rates. In response to 9/11, the US government significantly increased spending on national security and defense, allocating billions to military operations and homeland security initiatives. This shift in physical priorities influenced the allocation of resources across various sectors. Without the impetus of the attacks, government spending might have focused more on domestic programs such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure. This reallocation could have spurred different areas of economic growth and potentially altered the trajectory of national development. In summary, the absence of 9/11 might have led to a more stable financial market, sustained growth in the aviation and tourism industries, and a different focus in government spending, potentially fostering diverse economic advancements. The events of 9/11 left an indelible mark on the American collective consciousness, instilling a pervasive sense of vulnerability and leading to widespread psychological trauma. In a world where these attacks never transpired, the national psyche might have maintained a greater sense of security and optimism. Without the catalyst of 9/11, the surge in nationalistic fervor and unifying, albeit fear-driven, patriotism that followed may not have occurred. The societal focus could have remained on domestic issues, fostering a different kind of unity centered around progress and innovation rather than defense and security. The aftermath of 9/11 saw a significant increase in anxiety disorders, PTSD, and other mental health issues among the American populace. The constant media coverage and heightened alert levels contributed to a sustained state of public anxiety. In the absence of such a traumatic event, it's plausible that the general mental health of the population would have been more stable. Resources allocated to address post-9/11 mental health crisis could have been directed toward other public health initiatives, potentially improving overall societal well-being. Post-9/11, there was a notable shift in community dynamics with increased suspicion and division, particularly towards Muslim American communities. This erosion of social trust had long-lasting effects on community cohesion. In the scenario without 9/11, communities might have continued on a path towards greater inclusivity and mutual trust. Intercommunity relations could have strengthened, fostering collaborative efforts in addressing local and national challenges. In this alternate reality, the social and psychological landscape of the United States would have likely been characterized by greater stability, inclusivity, and a focus on collective well-being. The absence of 9/11 could have allowed for a societal trajectory emphasizing unity through diversity and proactive community engagement. In the years following 9/11, over 2 million Americans were deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. This led to significant challenges for military families, including increased rates of mental health issues, substance abuse, and family strain. Without the catalyst of 9/11, these extensive deployments might not have occurred, potentially sparing many families from the associated hardships. Children of service members, for instance, faced unique challenges, including frequent relocations and the emotional toll of having an absent parent. First responders played a crucial role during and after the 9/11 attacks, leading to increased recognition and appreciation for their service. However, this also brought about heightened stress and mental health challenges for many in these professions. In an alternate timeline without 9/11, first responders might have continued their duties without the added pressures and traumas associated with such a significant national crisis. The narrative of heroism in the US underwent a transformation post 9/11, with increased emphasis on military and first responder roles. In a world without the attacks, the concept of heroism might have remained more diverse, encompassing educators, healthcare workers, and community leaders. The aftermath of 9/11 saw a surge in public health initiatives addressing trauma, PTSD, and disaster recovery. Programs like the World Trade Center Health Program were established to support those affected. Without the attacks, resources allocated to these specific programs might have been directed towards broader public health concerns, potentially enhancing overall community well-being. Post 9/11, national security became a dominant theme in American politics and society, leading to increased surveillance and debates over civil liberties. In the absence of the attacks, the national discourse might have focused more on other pressing issues like education, healthcare, and economic development. In this alternate reality, the social and personal lives of Americans might have followed a different trajectory, with families and communities experiencing fewer disruptions and public health and national priorities taking diverse paths. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, the United States received an outpouring of global sympathy. The NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time, treating the attacks as an assault on all member nations. Countries worldwide offered support, leading to a unified front against terrorism. In a world without 9/11, such a profound moment of global solidarity might not have occurred. The US may have continued its diplomatic engagements without the intensified focus on counterterrorism alliances, potentially fostering different international collaborations centered around economic development, climate change, or technological innovation. The 9/11 attacks significantly influenced US foreign policy, leading to the Bush Doctrine, which emphasized preemptive strikes and unilateral action. This approach justified interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq, reshaping global perceptions of American diplomacy. Without 9/11, the US might have pursued a more multilateral and diplomacy-focused foreign policy. Engagements with countries like China, Russia, and members of the European Union could have centered more on trade, environmental agreements, and cooperative security measures rather than military interventions. Post 9/11 military actions, particularly the invasion of Iraq, led to widespread criticism and a decline in the global image of the US. Many allies questioned America's commitment to international law and multilateralism. In an alternate timeline, without these events, the US might have maintained a more favorable global standing. By focusing on collaborative international efforts and avoiding controversial military interventions, America's soft power and moral authority could have been preserved or even enhanced. In this alternate reality, global relations and diplomacy might have evolved with the United States playing a more collaborative and less militarized role on the world stage, potentially leading to stronger international partnerships and a more positive global perception. The 9/11 attacks prompted a significant shift in global security priorities, leading to the establishment of extensive counterterrorism measures and international collaboration. In a world without these attacks, the trajectory of global security might have been markedly different. Without the impetus provided by 9/11, nations may have continued to focus on traditional state-centric security concerns, such as territorial disputes and conventional military threats. The urgency to develop comprehensive counterterrorism strategies and intelligence sharing agreements might have been less pronounced, potentially delaying the formation of alliances like the Five Eyes expansion and other multilateral security frameworks. The global response to 9/11 led to the implementation of rigorous counterterrorism policies, including military interventions, surveillance programs, and homeland security initiatives. In the absence of 9/11, the scale and intensity of these measures might have been significantly reduced. Consequently, terrorist organizations could have operated with greater freedom, potentially leading to different patterns of activity and influence. The lack of a unified global counterterrorism effort might have allowed certain groups to expand their reach, while others may have remained localized threats. Post 9/11, international relations were heavily influenced by the global war on terror, with countries aligning based on their stance towards terrorism and related policies. Without the attacks, diplomatic relationships might have evolved differently, focusing more on economic partnerships, climate change, and technological collaboration. The absence of 9/11 could have led to a geopolitical landscape where alliances were shaped more by mutual interest in trade and development rather than security concerns. This might have fostered a more interconnected and cooperative international community. In this alternate reality, the long-term global trends would likely have been characterized by continued focus on traditional security concerns, a different evolution of terrorism and counterterrorism dynamics, and a diplomatic landscape shaped more by economic and developmental interests than by security alliances. When we think about the early 2000s, it's often overshadowed by the conflicts that emerged in response to terrorism. But imagine if instead of pouring trillions of dollars into war on terror, the United States had invested those resources in different global priorities. Could we have built a more peaceful, collaborative world? In the late 90s and early 2000s, the international community was becoming increasingly interconnected. Countries were exploring global agreements aimed at tackling pressing issues like climate change, poverty, and infectious diseases. Without the immediate threat of terrorism dominating headlines, these global initiatives might have taken center stage. For example, the Kyoto Protocol, aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, was just beginning to gain momentum. Imagine if the United States had fully committed to environmental leadership rather than diverting its attention to military interventions. The absence of war in Afghanistan and Iraq might have provided a space for diplomatic solutions to flourish elsewhere. Relationships between Western countries and Middle Eastern nations might have evolved more positively, built on economic cooperation and mutual respect rather than mistrust and conflict. Countries around the globe could have united more effectively in addressing humanitarian crises, combating global poverty, and investing in public health initiatives. Additionally, without the deep divisions caused by military intervention, the US might have maintained and strengthened its position as a respected diplomatic leader. America's global image could have stayed focused on innovation, economic opportunity, and cultural exchange, rather than being seen as aggressive or interventionist. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, international travel became a daunting experience. Visa processes tightened dramatically, airports became fortresses, and suspicion replaced openness in many intercultural interactions. But without these changes, the early 2000s could have represented a golden era of global mobility and cultural exchange. Imagine traveling internationally without the anxiety of invasive security screenings or lengthy visa processes. The travel industry would likely have thrived, promoting a more interconnected and culturally enriched world. Student exchange programs, tourism, and international trade could have expanded more rapidly, building stronger bonds between people from different backgrounds and fostering deeper understanding and empathy. Furthermore, universities and cultural institutions might have experienced more international collaboration, accelerating breakthroughs in education, research, and innovation. Cultural dialogues could have thrived, enabling more diverse perspectives in media, entertainment, and the arts. Think about how much rich our global culture could have been, with more open borders leading to increased exposure and appreciation of different traditions, cuisines, and ways of life. Additionally, without the stigma and suspicion that arose towards certain ethnic and religious groups post 9/11, communities could have grown in diversity and unity, strengthening social cohesion worldwide. Rather than fear and misunderstanding, interactions between cultures could have been characterized by curiosity, respect, and mutual learning. In essence, without the heavy burden and deep trauma caused by 9/11, our world might have taken a more hopeful, cooperative path. Investments in diplomacy, climate change mitigation, humanitarian efforts, and cultural exchanges could have cultivated a richer, more connected, and peaceful global society. Now, let's take a step back. For the past half hour, we've explored a world that never was, a world in which September 11th, 2001 never happened. We imagined a United States that never launched the war on terror, a world where thousands of troops never left home, where military families were never separated, where cities were never turned into battlegrounds, and where generations didn't grow up in the shadows of an endless war. We thought about the ripple effects on government surveillance, on trust in institutions, on global diplomacy. We considered how different things might have looked for Muslim communities, for international relations, for media, for travel, for culture. And through all of it, one thing becomes clear. Sometimes the absence of tragedy isn't just the lack of pain, it's the presence of possibility. It's impossible to know exactly how the world would have evolved without that moment. But asking what if forces us to recognize how much a single event can shape the course of everything, from individual lives to global systems. And maybe it makes us think a little harder about the choices we make going forward. What if the energy, the funding, the fear that followed 9/11 had been redirected toward healing the planet, connecting cultures, or building bridges instead of walls? What if peace had been the priority instead of war? What kind of world might we be living in today? This alternate timeline isn't just speculation. It's a mirror. It reflects what we've valued, what we've lost, and what we still have the power to change. If this video challenged you, moved you, or simply made you think about the world a little differently, then take a moment, drop a like, and subscribe to the channel. This is what Swaggy Pants is all about. We don't just ask what if to escape the world. We ask it to understand it better. And now, I want to hear from you. What do you think would have happened if 9/11 never took place? Would things be better, worse, or just different? Let's talk about it in the comments. Thanks for watching and thinking deeply with me. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.